picture this. You log into your computer on like a random Tuesday morning.
Right.
And there's this company-wide email just sitting in your inbox. The subject line says something incredibly vague like, a new chapter for our organization.
Oh, no. I know exactly where this is going.
Right. Instantly, your stomach just drops. Because if you have ever lived through a chaotic corporate reorganization or, I don't know, a sudden software rollout that absolutely nobody asked for.
Which happens all the time, by the way.
Oh, constantly. Or a massive shift in company vision that just completely missed the mark, you know exactly what that email actually means.
Yeah.
It means chaos is coming.
It usually means weeks of confusion, broken workflows, and just a lot of stressed out people trying to figure out if they, still have the same job description.
Yeah.
We've all been there. And the resulting fatigue is practically universal across every industry.
It really is. Which is exactly why we are doing this today. The mission of today's deep dive is to figure out why this happens to you, and more importantly, how to fix it.
Exactly.
We are looking into the field of organizational development, or OD for short. We've got a stack of sources here. We're going through intervention designs, deep data on communication systems, and actual real-world case studies to really crack the code on how organizations actually achieve sustainable change.
Instead of just creating total misery for the workforce.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because trying to execute organizational change is basically like trying to renovate a house while you are still living inside of it.
That's a great way to put it.
You are trying to tear down walls and update the plumbing, but you still need to cook dinner in the kitchen and sleep in the bedroom tonight.
Yeah, and that tension is exactly why organizational change has to be approached as a science.
Yeah.
It is never just about leadership, sending out a memo and expecting the daily operations to magically adapt.
Right, like an email is going to fix everything.
Exactly. Remodeling that metaphorical house requires balancing structure disruption with this intense understanding of human psychology. You have to keep the business running while simultaneously changing how the business runs.
Right, and before you can even think about swinging a sledgehammer in that house, you need a blueprint. In the corporate world, this process is called an intervention.
Yes.
But I want to make sure we are defining this clearly, because when most people hear the word intervention, they think of sitting a friend down on a couch to talk about a personal problem.
Right. But the corporate definition operates on a totally different scale. In OD, an intervention is defined as a set of sequenced, planned actions.
Sequenced and planned.
Exactly. Their entire purpose is to help the organization increase its effectiveness by purposely disrupting the status quo.
So the disruption is the point.
Yes, the disruption is not an accident. It is the fundamental mechanism of change. You are intentionally introducing a new sequence of tasks to force a shift in behavior.
But the research we have here draws a really hard line between the intervention strategy and the intervention activities. What is the actual difference on the ground? I mean, they sound like the same thing.
I get that. Think of the strategy as the overarching timeline and the ultimate goal. Imagine mapping out a timeline from, say, January to April.
Okay, a 4-month block.
Right. That entire 4-month block is your intervention strategy.
Yeah.
But inside that strategy, you have the granular activities that actually drive it forward.
The day-to-day stuff.
Exactly.
Mm.
So January might feature a team startup workshop to establish the baseline. Then February moves into role clarity sessions to figure out who is responsible for what.
Got it.
And then March pushes into process mapping to find the bottlenecks. So the strategy is the destination, but the activities are the mechanical steps you take each month to arrive there.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this core premise for a second.
Sure.
You just said the definition of an intervention is purposely disrupting the status quo. Isn't purposely disrupting people's daily routines exactly what makes you and your coworkers actively hate change initiatives?
Well, yes.
I mean, if I'm perfectly happy and efficient doing my job and you show up with a planned disruption, my immediate biological reaction is going to be resistance.
Oh, absolutely. And the field of organizational development entirely anticipates that human reaction. Foundational frameworks dictate that disruption only succeeds if very specific psychological conditions are met first.
Like what?
Well, you cannot just drop a bomb on a team's workflow. First, there has to be valid information, meaning people need to know the existential why behind the change.
They need a reason to care.
Exactly. Second, there has to be free and informed choice, meaning employees have a degree of agency in how the change is actually implemented.
Ah, so they aren't just being dictated to.
Right. And third, there has to be actual client readiness. If the culture is already completely burnt out, the intervention will just collapse under its own weight.
So you really have to prep the ground before you plant the seed.
You do. And the preparation goes down to the smallest details. When designing an intervention activity, the physical environment matters. The agenda matters.
Wow, really? Even the room setup?
Everything matters.
Yeah.
A skilled practitioner will actively decide whether to address, say, low anxiety issues first to minimize psychological strain, or jump straight into the deep end based on the team's resilience. It is highly calculated to build small wins early on.
Knowing that disruption requires such a meticulous blueprint, it makes me wonder what these interventions actually look like when an entire company is fundamentally broken. Because, I mean, an outdated tech startup faces vastly different problems than a crumbling hospital.
Very true. Which is why the field categorizes interventions into 4 distinct buckets: human process, technostructural, human resources management, and strategic.
Okay, let me bring this back to our house analogy to see if I'm visualizing this correctly.
Let's do it.
So technostructural interventions like downsizing or redesigning the work itself, that is like rearranging the actual plumbing and electrical wiring in our house.
Spot on.
And then human process interventions, which deal with team building and conflict resolution, that is like sending the roommates who live in the house to couples counseling so they stop yelling at each other.
Yes, perfect.
But where do the other two fit in? What about human resources management and strategic?
Building on that analogy, human resources management interventions would be rewriting the lease agreement and the chore chart.
Oh, okay.
It involves changing how you evaluate performance, how you distribute rewards, and managing diversity and wellness programs.
So the rules of the house.
Exactly. And strategic interventions are even bigger. That is, deciding whether the house should be converted into a duplex or if you should just sell it and move to a different neighborhood entirely.
Wow, okay. The big picture stuff.
Right. It deals with mergers, acquisitions, and sweeping cultural transformations to gain a competitive advantage.
Okay, so you have the plumbing, the counseling, the lease agreement, and the property line. How do these actually play out in the real world?
We can look at how they are synthesized in the industry case studies from the sources. Let's start with the retail sector.
Let's hear it.
There was a major retail chain suffering from intensely siloed departments, outdated technology, and just severe resistance from frontline employees.
The classic retail nightmare. Everyone is basically operating in their own little fiefdom.
Exactly. The solution required combining buckets. They implemented agile work methods and fundamentally restructured reporting lines. So that is the technostructural plumbing fix.
Right.
But here is why that mattered. By changing the reporting lines, the buyer and the merchandiser, who previously never spoke to each other, were suddenly forced to share a desk and a common metric.
Oh, wow. So structural changes literally force behavioral changes.
Yes. But to prevent total mutiny, they paired that with human process interventions, introducing new town hall formats to foster psychological safety.
Okay, so you change the plumbing, but you also give them the counseling to handle the new water pressure.
Exactly.
There is a healthcare example in the data, too, which I found really compelling because the stakes aren't just profits, it's patient survival.
Yeah, that one is intense. A hospital system was dealing with abysmal employee morale, high turnover, and suboptimal patient outcomes.
A bad combination.
Terrible. The intervention there created cross-functional care teams. Instead of nurses reporting only to a head nurse and pharmacists reporting only to a pharmacy director, they restructured them into single patient-focused units.
So breaking down the silos again, that's your technostructural fix.
Right. But the mechanism that actually improved patient outcomes was redesigning their daily communication protocols. Because they shared the same shift huddle, the nurse could flag a medication issue to the pharmacist in real time, removing all that hierarchical friction.
And then there's the tech sector case study, where everything is just moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour and the product life cycle is incredibly short.
In that software company, rapid agility was just a matter of survival. This required a heavy strategic intervention to pivot the company's market focus, combined with human resources management upskilling programs.
Because the old skills don't work anymore.
Exactly. If you change the strategic direction of a tech company, your engineers suddenly need a completely different skill set. So they had to revamp their entire performance and reward systems to incentivize learning those new skills quickly.
Makes sense.
In all three cases, it's never just one isolated activity. It is a comprehensive portfolio attacking the problem from structural and human angles.
Okay, but here is the catch. You can rearrange the reporting lines, you can roll out the new training modules, and you can rewrite the chore chart all you want.
Right.
If the employees living in that environment do not actually understand why the house is being renovated in the first place, the house is still going to burn down.
Oh, absolutely.
And this brings our deep dive to what seems to be the single biggest point of failure in any organizational change, the communication chasm.
Ineffective communication of the change vision is widely cited as the primary cause of failed organizational transformations. You could design a flawless intervention, but if the transfer of intent fails, the initiative just dies.
There is a George Bernard Shaw quote about this in the reading that feels incredibly relevant. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
It's so true.
Leaders send an email and think, great, I communicated the new strategy. But they didn't. And the statistic that backs this up absolutely blew my mind.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
According to the research, roughly 0.5% of all the words or facts that an employee receives over a 3-month period will be focused on the change vision.
Wait, 0.5%. Let's just visualize that math for a second.
It's tiny.
If you were working a standard 40-hour week, the amount of time your brain is actually engaging with this grand new corporate vision is measured in mere minutes.
The daily routine just completely drowns it out. The urgent emails, the endless status meetings, the operational fires, that is the 99.5%. For the executive team, the change vision is their primary focus. So they feel like they are talking about it constantly. But for the employee on the ground, it is a tiny drop in an ocean of daily information overload.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
I want to challenge this.
Okay, go for it.
We live in an era where we have Slack, Microsoft Teams, automated emails, text threads, Zoom. We are communicating with each other more rapidly now than at any other point in human history.
True.
Why is this harder now? Shouldn't all these tools make it effortless to blast that change vision out to every single person in the company simultaneously?
You'd think so, but the data points directly to the sterility of electronic communication technologies.
Sterility, what do they mean by that?
Well, human relationship is foundational to how we interpret a message. When you rely on mediums that strip away human nuance, like a mass email or a sterile Slack announcement, that exact same message is interpreted wildly differently depending on who receives it.
Oh, because there's no tone of voice, no eye contact, no shared context. I mean, a simple period at the end of a sentence in a chat message can be read as aggressive by one person and completely professional by another.
And because leaders often lean heavily on digital communication for scale, they become less skilled in personal, authentic modes of interaction.
They hide behind the keyboard.
They do. These change-oriented communications end up sounding lofty, vague, and incredibly impersonal. When a message lacks authenticity, the workforce simply doesn't trust the sender. And without that fundamental credibility, the intervention is dead on arrival.
So since simply blasting more emails into the void clearly doesn't work, how do successful change leaders actually cut through that 99.5% of daily noise? How do you become the signal?
It requires a highly intentional communication system, starting with the behavior of leadership itself. The most critical practice outlined in the sources is that top management must police themselves.
Practice 3, walk the talk.
Exactly. If prominent leaders act in a way that is inconsistent with the change vision, all other forms of communication are instantly disregarded.
It's the ultimate credibility killer. I mean, if you tell us we need to be lean and cut costs, but management is still flying first class to luxury retreats, nobody is going to listen to a word you say.
Actions communicate far louder than the company newsletter. Once leadership is actually modeling the behavior, they have to package the message correctly.
Which brings up practices 4 and 5.
Right. This involves utilizing stories, metaphors, analogies, and visual imagery. Corporate jargon is inherently forgettable. Figurative communication bridges the gap between abstract corporate goals and the emotional reality of the workforce. It makes the unknown future state much more understandable.
But what happens when the plan isn't perfect? Because no corporate rollout ever goes flawlessly, and usually the employees on the ground spot the fatal flaws way before the executive team does.
That leads to practice 6, one of the most vital and uncomfortable practices, seeking to discuss the undiscussable.
Honestly, that sounds absolutely terrifying for a middle manager to implement. Hey everyone, let's talk about the giant elephant in the room that might actually get me fired.
It is terrifying because human beings naturally fear releasing negative emotions that could jeopardize their working relationships.
Right.
But consider the alternative. If leaders willfully ignore logical inconsistencies or the obvious flaws in a new initiative, the entire system loses credibility.
Because everyone already knows it's broken.
The workforce already knows the flaws exist. Dragging those flaws out into the light proves that leadership views the employees as actual partners in the success of the organization, rather than just cogs in a machine.
That makes total sense. If the plan has a massive hole in it and leadership pretends it doesn't, everyone assumes leadership is either lying or completely incompetent. Admitting the flaw builds trust.
It really does.
And speaking of trust, that brings us to practice 7, the informal social networks. To use an analogy, leveraging the informal network is essentially finding the hidden influencers at the company water cooler, rather than just relying on the CEO's corporate megaphone, right?
That's a perfect way to visualize it. The formal channels are the town halls and the memos, driven by hierarchy. But the informal social network is entirely non-hierarchical.
It's just people talking to people.
Exactly. It is the invisible web of relationships that is constantly evolving, based purely on trust, reciprocity, and common values.
It's the people who actually run the company. You know, the person everyone goes to when they need to know what's really happening with the new software update.
And because these informal networks are built on genuine trust rather than job titles, they are far more fluid and responsive. If a change leader wants to leverage this, they first have to map out who these central nodes of trust actually are.
Find the influencers.
Right. If you can convince the water cooler influencers of the change vision's value, their impact on the broader culture is magnified tenfold compared to a standard executive broadcast.
But those informal influencers only matter if leadership actually understands the mindset of the human beings who are receiving the message. Which brings us to a really fascinating psychological concept in the research, the bell curve of readiness.
Yes. When an organization is confronted with a massive disruption, the individuals within it do not react uniformly. They naturally distribute themselves along a normal distribution, a bell curve, in terms of their readiness to change.
So you have your early adopters on one end who are thrilled about the new direction.
Right.
Your massive chunk of people in the middle who are just keeping their heads down, waiting to see what happens.
And your absolute resistors on the far end actively dragging their feet.
Right, the resistors.
But the psychology of those resistors is often misunderstood.
Yeah.
They are rarely acting out of pure malice.
Really, it feels like malice sometimes.
It does, but in many cases, these individuals were highly competent and rewarded under the old system. The planned disruption threatens their competence and their professional identity.
Ugh.
They are resisting because they are protecting a workflow they spent years mastering.
Whoa, that is a huge perspective shift. They aren't trying to sabotage the company. They're trying to protect their own psychological safety.
Exactly.
So how do you manage that wide spectrum of reactions?
You cannot rely on one-way communication. You must build robust feedback loops. These loops are essential to uncover what was actually heard versus what management thought they said.
Because those two things are rarely the same.
Never the same. It reveals what information was retained and what new behaviors are actually emerging on the floor.
But here's a question about those feedback loops. The research explicitly mentions that feedback loops often provide wildly conflicting information.
Well, they do.
If a leader is looking at that bell curve and the early adopters are saying, go faster, while the resistors are saying this is a complete disaster, how does a leader avoid just freezing up in the face of all that contradictory data?
The attribute of the change leader becomes paramount here. A successful change leader must act as a superb synthesizer of information.
Synthesizer, meaning they have to process it all at once.
Yes. They don't ignore the conflicting data. They lean into it. They listen intently to those advocating different images of the emerging reality, particularly the resistors.
Wait, listen to the resistors?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because the resistors often highlight genuine operational risks that the overly optimistic early adopters miss completely.
Ah. You use the friction to refine the blueprint.
Yes. You use those feedback loops to adjust the intervention strategy in real time, and then And this is the critical step. You take those lessons learned and you distribute them back out to the organization.
To show them you're listening.
Exactly. You leverage small wins,
Yeah.
you show the workforce, we heard the friction, we adapted the process, and look at this positive result.
Yeah.
It creates a loop of continuous alignment.
It makes them an active participant in the renovation instead of just forcing them to breathe in the dust while the walls are coming down around them.
Beautifully said.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's synthesize this for you, the listener. What we've discovered is that successful organizational change is never just some magical accident.
Definitely not.
It requires a highly intentional blueprint, an intervention that purposely disrupts the status quo, utilizing structural plumbing fixes and human process counseling. But that disruption only works if it is perfectly paired with authentic multi-channel communication. You have to cut through that 99.5% of routine noise by actively modeling the right behavior, dragging the undiscussable flaws into the light, and trusting your informal networks.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for you?
Ultimately, whether you are the manager tasked with designing a massive departmental shift, or you are simply the employee trying to survive the chaos of a corporate reorg, understanding these underlying mechanics removes a significant amount of anxiety.
It really does.
It proves that change isn't just a hollow corporate buzzword or a random punishment from above. When executed correctly, it is a deeply human process. It requires alignment, it requires immense trust, and it demands continuous honest feedback from everyone involved.
It really is all about the human element, which leaves me with one final thought, a lingering question that I want to pose to you, the listener, to mull over on your own. We've talked extensively today about how successful change requires discussing the undiscussable and relying heavily on those informal, non-hierarchical social networks, the water cooler influencers built on trust, shared context, and serendipitous moments.
Right, the natural interactions.
But what happens to organizational change in a fully remote, asynchronous work environment? If we're all just isolated boxes on a screen and those organic water cooler moments no longer naturally exist, I mean, how do you successfully renovate the house when everyone is living in completely separate houses to begin with?
That is the million-dollar question right now.
Something to think about the next time you get one of those vague, a new chapter emails. Until next time, keep digging deeper.